All right, so I think I'll go ahead and get started. There's about 10 of us in here. So first off, I'm Jordan. I'm the co-VP for ACM. And today's GBM will be an introductory workshop to React. And basically, if you guys have any questions throughout the workshop, you can go ahead and unmute your mic and just ask the question, or feel free to put it in the chat. And we have other officers in this GBM who will go ahead and answer your questions if I don't see it. So go ahead and get started. So just an overview of today's workshop. Uh, Basically, this workshop is intended for pure beginners of React. Although if you already are familiar with React, let this act as sort of a refresher for you. So first off, we'll be going over what React is, who created React, and who uses it. And I'll be explaining to you why you should learn React and how it can benefit you as someone who aspires to go into web development as maybe a career in the future. Secondly, we'll go over how React library specifically works in terms of what languages are used and what type of programming styles are implemented in React. Next, we'll go over functional versus class components. That's an important concept for you to know when building React apps. Fourth, we'll go over some software requirements and prerequisites. So basically, I'll just be going over like what you should have installed in your system before working with React, and what languages you should sort of be familiar with before getting into React. Then we'll go ahead and set up a React project, and I'll be going over, I'll screen share and show you how to build a simple to-do app. So it's going to be really fun. And then lastly, I'll be going over some resources that you guys can explore after this React workshop if you guys are interested in learning more about React. So what is React? So React is an open source JavaScript library that is used to build front-end user interfaces for mobile or web applications. Essentially, so who created React and who uses it? So Facebook deployed and maintains React. React also receives help and maintenance from thousands of open source contributors around the world. So like, for example, there is a GitHub repository for React. There's constantly updates in the repo day to day. We have open source contributors constantly improving and innovating React. And so some of the websites and mobile apps that use React technology are Facebook, Khan Academy, and Netflix. So if you guys have ever been on those websites before or apps, you guys have been using React technology, which is really cool. Some of the mobile apps that are popular that use React are Discord, Walmart, and Uber Eats. So those are some very popular names that are constantly implementing React technology within their products. So why should you learn React? Essentially, many companies have been using React and are also actively adopting React within their products. React is a really good framework to use, especially for those of you who want to get into front-end web development. It's also one of the most used JavaScript frameworks. So aside from like, Angular or Django and all those other frameworks, React is one of the most popular ones, and is also easy to learn. So it's pretty easy to pick up. You don't need to know like everything about JavaScript to get into React. As long as you know the basics, you should be fine. It's not that difficult. Next, we'll go over how it works. So React uses JavaScript as the main language, and it also uses JSX, which is basically JavaScript markup language, which essentially lets you write HTML within JavaScript. For example, this makes it easier for us to like format our web page within a single JavaScript file instead of having to constantly move back between your HTML file and your JavaScript file. JSX just makes it a lot easier for us to write code on the go. Secondly, React is component-based. So each React app contains components that represent specific screens or elements in an app. So we can constantly create components within our React app and use them in different pages or screens within our project. So this essentially is like putting building blocks together, and it makes it really nice and neat. So we don't have to keep writing the same exact code. We can just reuse components throughout our project. Third, React is declarative. So we tell React what we want and it does the rest. For example, like we can tell our React components like where we want it on our page, and it'll take care of rendering those components and making sure that we see them. We don't have to care about like how it will do it. We just tell React what we want. And I'll show you guys examples about those, about declarative programming. And lastly, it's unopinionated. So there really isn't any right way to do something in React. For example, there are different types of libraries that you can use to route pages together. So some of the libraries that you can use are React Router, Router 5, Redux Router. These different libraries basically do the same thing, but React doesn't force developers to do it in one specific way. And this just offers a lot of flexibility and just makes it, fun to just choose whatever you want to include in your project and how you want to do it. So it's very flexible. Functional versus class components. So this is just a table that basically lays out the differences and similarities about functional and class components. So to start off with functional components are basically nicknamed stateless components because they are taking care of, basically they are representing static data, and so they're not constantly updating the state. They're just stateless. And writing functional components uses shorter code or less code. Basically, you'll be using a shorter boilerplate for that. And it basically is just a JavaScript function in itself. And these type of functional components cannot fetch data. So hence why they are called stateless again. For class components, they are the opposite of functional in that they are stateful. They are used for fetching dynamic data. And because of this, because of the more power that is used for class components, it does require a lot more code, or not a lot more code, but just more code than functional components. So you'll be using a larger boilerplate, and it sort of uses an object-oriented approach. So you'll be using like constructors and states for your data inside your React class component. So here's a little like snippet of what a basic functional and then class component looks like. As we can see in the functional component, it just basically is a JavaScript function in itself. And here we see that it returns the JSX, so just a hello world. And inside of the class component, we see that we can sort of see the functional component inside the class component, in that like this render part basically is like the function that returns the JSX. But also above this render tag, we can also implement as many functions as we want to handle the state of any data that's within our component. And other differences include like we have to define component specifically in the React library and import that as well, because our class component is an extension of the component part of the React library. And so, yeah, that's basically the difference. So for software requirements, you just basically need any internet browser. So Chrome, Firefox, Brave, anything you use, it should be fine. Node.js is required as well. So if you do not have Node.js downloaded, you can go ahead and access this link. I'll go ahead and paste it in the chat. Let me go paste that. So yeah, go ahead and download that if you don't have it already. And I recommend that you guys download the latest recommended for most users version, not the current version, because I believe like it's not the most stable version. So you might run into some problems, when you're working on your project. So the LTS recommended for most users version should be fine enough. And then some other recommendations that I have for when you do work with React are using VS Code along with their these included extensions. So Prettier and ES7 snippets are two extensions that will just basically work like magic. It makes your React development a lot easier. Prettier basically formats your code automatically. So if you forget something while writing JavaScript, like if you forget a colon or a semicolon in JavaScript, it'll basically fill that in for you. It'll take care of all the spaces and tabs and such. It'll just make it a lot easier. And ES7 snippets is basically just an extension that'll basically lay out the boilerplate code for whenever you want to use a class component or a functional component, like it'll just lay out all this code for you, so you don't have to constantly rewrite import React component from React and do all that. For It's really good for if you have like a React app with lots of components, so you can just generate this boilerplate code every time. So I'll go ahead and paste those links as well if you do have VS Code and you do want to install those extensions. And some prerequisites for React. It is helpful to know some JavaScript, HTML, and Node. Although if you guys don't know one of these, it's totally fine. Like you guys can just follow along. You learn as you go. You know, obviously, whenever we learn something, it always requires just like following along and just learning as you go. And you know, you guys are fine if you don't know everything. And then for setup, we'll go over if you guys do have Node installed, just go ahead and run node v in your terminal to ensure that you have it installed and the version should show up. So for anyone that is following along, do you guys have Node installed already? You do? Okay, perfect. Perfect. Not yet. Okay. Yeah, so if you don't have it downloaded yet, I sent the link to the download page and you can just go ahead and download the latest version. It should be very quick. Shouldn't take too long. Just let me know if you guys need time for those who are downloading it so that I can just move on to the project build. Start building the project. All right. And so if you guys have any problems like with installations or anything, just go ahead and unmute your mic and ask again. And you can also leave it in the chat as well. And we have officers that can help you out with that. I'll go ahead and start sharing my other screen real quick. Give me 1 second. All right. So I have my screen shared now. So if you guys do have Node already installed, you guys can go ahead and just recheck your version to see if you guys have it installed. So there you go, version 14. So what you are going to want to do is go ahead and go to your desired directory where you guys want the project to be in your files. So I'm already in the projects folder. So I'm going to go ahead and use the command npx create react app. And I'm going to want to put the title after that. So let's put like to do app ACM. And then after that, Node will do some magic and go ahead and generate your React project for you. So we'll just go ahead and wait for that. So if you guys are also following along with this and you don't see exactly what I have on the screen, like mine might look a little different because I have Yarn installed and just basically is an alternative to Node, but you guys should like it won't make any difference in terms of like the project itself. It just Yarn installs it differently, so that's just how it is. Okay, so now we have this finish screen. We can just go ahead and change directory into our app. And then we can just do, all right, cd to do app ACM. Yeah, so the command is npx create dash react dash app and then the name of your project. So yeah, once you do that, just go ahead and go back to the directory of your project and then do npm start. So let's see. It'll go ahead and open up the project locally. So let's go ahead and wait for that. And there we go. So we do have the regular React project page. And then we'll go ahead and also open up our project in our code editor. So let's see. Let me just open it up. Do app ACM. So once you open up your project in your code editor, you should see all these files. You should see a node modules, public file, and then a folder, and then a source folder. And then before we go ahead and start running or typing some code, I'll go ahead and go over I'll show you guys the extensions that I have installed to make it much easier. So let me look up extensions. So again, prettier. This makes formatting much easier. Works like magic. I highly recommend you guys install this.
And more higher priority or whatever, we don't care. Every time we only focus.
Oh, okay. And then the other extension is ES7 React Redux snippets. So that just makes it a lot easier to generate the boilerplate code. So yeah, go ahead and install those if you guys don't have those installed yet and are using VS Code. So basically, once you guys have those extensions installed, we're gonna go ahead and go over like the files that are already in our project. So just right off the bat, we can see that the app.js file is basically like an overview of our project. So we can see that like when we edit, let's say, if we edit, let's just write in here like ACM GBM 4. We can see that it's actively changed on our browser. So that's really cool. And then let me just, so right off the bat, like some of the other files that you can delete upon creating your React app is your, let's see, app test.js. We don't need that. So we can just go ahead and delete that, make things less complicated and have less files in our directory. Our index.css, we won't need that as well. What else? Our logo SVG, we won't need that as well. Setup tests.js, you can go ahead and delete that as well. And yeah, so the main like file that we'll be working on is just the app.js. So as we can see, like before when I showed you guys the differences between functional and class components, we can see that like here we are using it did generate a functional component. So in order to change that to a class component for our to-do app, which is what we'll need to make the to-do app, we'll just go ahead and like take everything out and just type RCC, which is like the command for the ES7 extension, and then just press enter, and it generates the entire boilerplate code for a class component. So that just makes it much easier. So we don't have to like memorize the code again and just constantly write the same thing over and over again. And then we'll just like re-import our app CSS file. So it shouldn't compile anything right now because we obviously don't have anything yet. But basically, for the to-do app, we are going to use a class component because whenever we're adding stuff into our to-do list, we are going to have to constantly update the state of our data inside of our to-do list. So we're going to use like about 3 functions, I believe. But before we go ahead and do that, let's move on to the the JSX code. So inside of here, we'll just keep this container, our div, and we'll just like, in terms of doing the styling later, we'll just add a class name to it and just add class name app. And then if you see the code that's like constantly moving around and reformatting, that's just the prettier code extension doing its work. So in order to activate that, you can just go ahead and go to a command and then comma. I forgot to show you guys this, but once after you have prettier downloaded, just do format on save, search up format on save, and then make sure that is checked so that prettier knows to format every time you save the file. So after creating that container, we'll just go ahead and just create another container for our list. And then we'll also add a class name for that, so that it'll just be much easier for us to like style it later on to make it look better. And then we'll just add the title for our to-do list, which is going to be done through an H1 tag. And then we'll just name it to-do list. And then after that, we'll use an input form. And inside this input form, we're going to have our type to be text. So and then our placeholder for our input form is going to be just like type input, type item here, or type to do here, whatever you guys want to name it. And then after that, we're going to have a value for our input form. So whenever we input something into the input field, we need to give it a value. So let's just put it as this dot state dot new item. And so that's what it should look like so far. And then every time the input field changes, we need to add something for that. So every time an input field changes, we're going to have an event that's called basically E. So we're going to set the event equal to this dot update input. And then our update input function is going to need two parameters. So new item and E dot target dot value. Okay, and let's see. I think we do have an extra one there. And so before we do these as well, let's go ahead and just start on our functions that'll help manage our state. So we're gonna have like, as we can see, we have like an update function that we defined, but we haven't actually made that function yet. So we'll just go ahead and start that right now. So like I said, like above the render, that's where we can define our functions in a class component. So we're just gonna do update input, and then it'll be using two arguments, so key and value. So for every item that we add, it'll have a unique key and then the value of the item. So inside of that, we'll have this dot state, set state, and then we'll have that, and then we'll have the key linked to the value. So that's our update function that'll be responsible for updating. This will be called every time the input field is changed. And then before that as well, we'll also need our constructor. So it's going to take in some props, and then inside of our constructor, we'll do super props. This dot state equals, and then we'll have new item and then also list. And our list is just basically every item that we have on our to-do list, so that inside of our JSX, we can loop through that list and display everything that's within our list that we added. So after that, let's go ahead and also just define two more functions that we need for our to-do app. These two functions will be responsible for adding an item and deleting an item. So let's start with the add item function first. So just go ahead and do, we'll define a const, and then we'll name it new item. And then it'll again, like we have a unique identifier for each item that we add into our list. So it'll just be 1 plus math.random. And then we'll have a value attached to it as well, which is basically, again, the value will be whatever you put inside of the input field. So if you put like homework, that's going to be the value of it. So this dot state dot new item dot slice. Let's see if I did that right. And then we're gonna also define our list, which is basically this is just a copy of the current list items. So we'll do this dot state dot list. And then again, every time we add a new item, we want to push it into our new item variable. So we'll do list dot push new item. And then we're gonna also set the state of our list. So we're gonna do that by doing this dot set state. And then list comma new item. So that's basically the entirety of the add item function. And after that, we're gonna do the delete item function. So it's just basically gonna take in a parameter, which is the ID of the item that we want to delete. So it's gonna take that ID and delete that corresponding value that's within our list. So we'll just do delete item.id. And then after that, we'll define our list again, which will just basically be a copy of our current list like we used in the add item function. And then we'll do const updated list, because since we made a new list, we want to create an updated list so that we can store that into the list state. And then we'll have that equal to list dot filter and then item, and then that'll be equal to item.id equal to not equal to ID. And then after that, we're gonna set the state to the updated list. So we'll do this dot set state. Let's see, and then list updated list. So I believe this is, yeah, that is the entirety of the delete item function that we'll be using. So let's see. So again, we're basically just copying the current list of items. And then after that, we're gonna, given like the ID in the function that's being passed into the function, we're gonna create an updated list that filters out the item being deleted. And then we call filter, which will basically take in an item and then return the item ID. And if it's not equal to the current ID, then it deletes it. So, and then after that, we just set the state to the updated list. And then again, like these are the three main functions that are responsible for managing the state of our to-do list app. Because basically in a to-do list, honestly, all you're doing is just adding an item, deleting an item, and then updating the input field. So whatever item that you want to add, it's gonna have a function for that as well. So after that, we're gonna go ahead and move back to the JSX and update our, let's see, we do have our input field done already. So instead of just having a closing tag for the input, we'll just change it to that. And then next to our input field, so just imagine our like app so far. I don't think it's rendering something because we still need to finish it. Let me see, index.css. Okay, so anyways, I think I have to change index. Yep. Also within your index.js file, we're gonna have to delete the import index.css because we did delete that file. So I believe, okay. So after that, below our, let's see, below our input field, we're gonna have a button. So that button is gonna call the whenever it's clicked. So we'll add an on click. It's gonna call the function add item. So I'm gonna set it equal to this dot add item. So this basically calls the function add item that we made above right here. So that's what happens every time the button is clicked. And then we just want to name our button. We'll just put like add, because again, like this button will carry out the function of adding our item. So after that, we're gonna space it out and add like a break line into it. And then basically we pretty much have, let's see if I mess something up. 22 value this dot state. So instead of an equal sign, this is supposed to be colon. So this is what we have so far in our to-do list. So again, we have the H1 tag, which is done through JSX, which is basically to-do list. So we can see that right here in our H1 tag. Then we have our input field, which we defined right here. And then next to our input field, we also defined a button, which is add, which is basically what's responsible for adding the stuff that is inside the input field onto our list. So far right now, we basically just have a list of items, but we need to also display that list of items so that we can actively see our current to-do list. So whenever we add something right now, we won't see anything because we need to display that list. So in order to display that, we'll be using what's called like unordered lists and lists in JSX. So we can do that by defining UL, which is short for unordered list. And then inside of our unordered list, it'll basically be taking in this dot state dot list, and then we'll map the items. And then let's see. I'm gonna map the item and then opening tag like that. And then we're just gonna return the JSX again. That's within our list. So let me just close that off. And then again, so for our list, we're gonna want to store it in our unordered list by using the next, the next like hierarchy that's within our unordered list. So that's just gonna be a list. So basically like an unordered list, just think about that as your entire list from top to bottom, your entire list container. And each item that you add to your list, that's just called like the list item, which is with the LI tag. And then inside of our list, we're gonna have the key equal to the item ID. And then basically for the item ID that this list tag is representing, we're gonna print the value of it. And then for every value, so this value basically should display like if we add homework, that is what item.value is. Next to each one of our items in our list, we're also going to want to add a button because we want to also delete whatever's in our React app or our to-do list. We want to delete specified items. So we're going to add just a button to that as well. And then we'll just add some class names for better, so that later we can add some CSS to it. I'll just name that button 2 because we already do have a button up here at the top. I should also name this one button 1 so that when we work on the CSS later, it'll be a lot easier. So yeah, after we have our class name, we're gonna use an onClick function. So this is gonna call the delete item function. So it's gonna take in again, in our delete item function, we have an ID. So it's going to take in the item of the ID of the item that we want to delete. And then after that, we're just going to name our button. So let's see. Button. We're just going to name it with an X. And then we're going to close off our list like that. Let's see if I made any errors. let's see. All right, there we go. So again, this is basically what's being displayed onto our React app. And each list right here, this is responsible for basically displaying each value within our list. So let's see what we have. So I believe if we can go ahead and start adding some items to test it out. Let's see. So test. So as you can see, like every time we add an item and we press add, again, it's calling the add item function. It's putting whatever's in this input field into our list. It's updating the state of that list and displaying each item in our list onto here with JSX. And then let's add like, groceries, homework. So yeah, that's basically, and then we added a second button next to each value in our list, right? So it's gonna basically delete the item by calling the delete function that we already made as well. So with that, I believe we are done with the React app in itself. So if you guys have any questions so far, you guys can go ahead and ask. And basically, you guys can do the CSS on your own time. I'll just go ahead and show you like the CSS that I done for this project before this workshop. So let me GitHub desktop. Let me start it up. Okay, and then this is basically just the CSS that I added. So it can look like that once you utilize the class names that we defined in each, like, for example, each button, divider, container that we have. So it's just basic CSS. So, class name app list, we just basically formatted that in CSS accordingly. And so, yeah, we can just add items. So homework, water plants. And we can also delete items within our to-do list. So yeah, that's basically the app in itself. I'll go ahead and share with you guys some resources that you guys can explore after this workshop. Let me go ahead and give myself host again. Let's see. Make host. So I'll go ahead and copy and paste these resources inside of the chat. So basically, if you want to learn more about JavaScript, you can explore the Mozilla JavaScript docs. That's really helpful. React docs straight from React in itself, very helpful. W3 schools helpful as well. Reactiflex Discord server. So basically the React community in a Discord server. If you guys like are developing like your own React project and you have a question, you can always go into their help channel and ask a question. There's usually someone that'll help you debug or help you with your errors within like 5 minutes. I've always used that Discord server for help. And then you can also explore the subreddit wiki. And then the last link is also a GitHub repo of the to-do app that I made. So if you guys want to explore the code and look at it again, that's where you can go on to. So yeah, if you guys enjoyed, just let me know. We'll also post the recording of this meeting after so that you guys can look back on it as well if you want to. And yeah, that's basically it. Let me know if you guys have any questions. You can always ask in the Discord, ACM Discord as well. And just